We're in the 5th section of chapter 2, verses 15 to 22, where Moses runs away. When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. So we're going to look at what Midian is and find out what that's all about. Where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, the priest of Midian, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" And they answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds, and he even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Where is he?" he asked the daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipphora to Moses to marry. Zipphora gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become an alien in a foreign land." Now here's another interesting section. Moses flees to Midian. He had to get out of Egypt. Egypt was ruled by the pharaohs. They actually had border guards, and he had to get through those border guards and to go wherever he was going to flee to. He could have gone back to Palestine, where Joseph came from, and Jacob, but no, he goes into the deserts, probably weaving his way through the mountains. He knew the area because he spent 40 years in Midian. Now, where was Midian? Now, if you look on the chart that I have, and if you have it printed out, it's easier to see. Midian was over here beyond the Gulf of Suez, or the Red Sea. There's two angles of the Red Sea. One goes kind of straight up toward the delta of Egypt. The other angles off to the side. That is also the Red Sea. And on the opposite side of that, on the eastern side, is where Midian is, that land, that whole land. And I won't bore you with all of the study of Midian, but it is interesting, and I've given you some documents to show you who the Midianites were, where they came from, and who this guy Reuel was, who later is called Jethro. All of that's very interesting to us. But see the story. Moses is still dressed as an Egyptian. He still had his pigtail. And he arrives there, probably worn out and tired. He arrives at the well. Studies have shown that there's only one area of water in that whole section of Midian, and it's near the town of Al-Bad, A-L-B-A-D. And there's only one well, and that's nearby that town. That town was probably the town of Reuel. That is where he went to have dinner with Reuel. And so he arrives at the well. Shepherds come along and try to chase the girls away, and Moses stands up and he defends them. Now, we don't know if he practiced some kind of jujitsu that he learned in the military in Pharaoh's kingdom, but he was probably a strong guy and had some abilities, and he chased off these shepherds. Now, somebody in our class said, "Well, it doesn't say in my translation that he fought them or that he in any way defended." But in the Hebrew, the words are very clear. He got up, which is a motivation of being in a passive position to an upright position. And then it says in verse 17, he came to their rescue. He rushed to their rescue. And what we need to do as we read scriptures, try to envision that happening. He's doing what the Levi always did. Levi's had the characteristic of justice and helping the impoverished and helping those that have been abused. And so Moses, again, is showing that characteristic. He rushes in and helps the daughters of Reuel. And then in verse 19 it says, the Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. So we know he was dressed like an Egyptian. He looked like an Egyptian. He probably smelled like an Egyptian. And he rescued them. Then the girls go home and their dad says, "What did you do? Just leave him there? That's not our culture. Invite him to come and have dinner." So he went and had dinner. And the scripture makes it very easy, very simple. It kind of puts everything in a summarized form. And it says, he ate with them, and then Reuel gave him his daughter to marry. Now, I doubt very much that it happened that fast. You don't just sit down to a meal and say, "Hey, have a piece of turkey. Hey, have a piece of lamb. Hey, have my daughter. Take my daughter for your bride." We don't know exactly what took place in that whole courtship and agreement to marry, but he married Zipphora, and God allowed him to have his own family. As a matter of fact, this Reuel, who's later called Jethro, is already part of the family. You see, his ancestors came from the brother of Abraham, a brother of Abraham whose name was Midian, who moved down to this territory and with his tribes and with his family, extended family, made this their home. And so Moses spends 40 years in Midian, 40 years with Jethro, or Reuel as his name is called, and he spends that time differently than he did in his time in Egypt. 40 years in Egypt being trained in all the knowledge and all the sciences. Now he's 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd being taught by God. Reuel was a priest of Midian. Some people suggest that he was a priest of a foreign god, but he was not. He was a child of Abraham, of Abraham's family. He worshiped the same God. He worshiped the God who created the world, the one and true God. It's kind of like Melchizedek. Melchizedek is referred to in the New Testament and in the book of Genesis, where Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, who was the priest of Salem, the priest of Jerusalem, who would be the similar thing, a priest of the one true living God. Elohim is who he worshipped.